Okay. So the theme, the beginning of print and electronic media in Pakistan is, I think it's the most important theme to begin with, is that where did Pakistani media begin? Like uh, overall, if we look at the course and we look at the Pakistani media overall from 1947 till date, I can easily uh, define it as a struggle for role in governance and then the government's response. That's mostly in one sentence, that the media always struggled to get a more evident role in governance. And we'll discuss what governance means when it comes to the media and how governments responded. That's the main idea when we look at the Pakistani media system. This becomes at times difficult. Yeah. So first is the print media. I'll share the data with you, but the most important element in Pakistani print media is that newspapers and people migrated. That we know about the migration of people from India to Pakistan and from Pakistan to India, but that was not all. Newspapers also migrated. They settled, they found their new places in both countries. And that was also a process of adjustment. It was not simply a new country, but like in the sense of governance, that Pakistan and India became two independent nations in 1947. But it was also a question of adjusting into new cities, with new ethnic identities and all that. One big name, if I may say, is Jung, for example. Like Jung started in Delhi and it migrated to Pakistan. And then Jung established itself as you can see now, the most influential media group in Pakistan, not simply in print, but also it's the largest circulating newspaper in Pakistan. But its sister network, Geo, is the largest viewed television network in Pakistan. Its biggest rival at that time was Nawai Waqt, which was Lahore based. So we see that newspapers migrated, and radio didn't need to migrate because we'll discuss it later. And so they established themselves. Some of them died, like Jung and Anjam both migrated, but Anjam died. Jung rose to the eminence that we see in the role now. And then there was this role conception. Like literacy is still not the biggest strength of Pakistan. Like people are not literate, literacy is low. Imagine 1947, there were urban centers where there was education, like especially Lahore and Karachi, for example. Peshawar, Quetta were far behind. I don't know how it was in Faisalabad or Gujranwala, Gujarat, but like the big centers were Lahore and Karachi. Lahore has the fortune of being a media center even before partition. So Lahore had a very strong role in development of media. Karachi, on the other hand, got a very strong role because of migrants from India. Many people settled there, being a port city, being a big city, and being a capital at that time also. Keep in mind that Karachi was the capital of Pakistan in 1947. So everybody who came from India, their first choice would have been Karachi. And that's why you see a lot of Urdu-speaking community which was educated. So these two became the biggest center. So the role conception at that time amongst young people who were journalists was that they thought that they were leaders. So it was their duty to inform people. And this is what one of the guidance roles that they had. They thought that it's their responsibility to guide the population. And herein lies basically the conflict between the media professionals and the government. The government, on the one hand, I remember one of you saying that when you read what I write, you get an impression that there was a gun pointed to the head of a journalist, and that's basically, it's not metaphorically, it's metaphorically true also, but it is the truth, and the reasons are many. You look at the very immediate response that the government gave to the media in Pakistan. And there is this very interesting book, Rai Shakil Akhtar's book, Media, Religion and Politics in Pakistan, which focuses on the first 11 years of Pakistani media. And it gives it's a testament to the fact that that the media wanted more role in governance, whereas the rulers were in no way ready to do that, because they thought that they knew best what the people needed. And we can see the same symptoms still, like in government. Governance is considered to be the sole prerogative of the people who are in politics, and everybody else just has to serve them. If somebody is in the government, they won't like the media. If they are in the opposition, they will always try to pamper journalists and things like that. And this has remained one of the most important traits of Pakistani politics. So how can we prove that? Like, the first thing is that the government decided to go for a national press trust. National press trust basically was formed to nationalize vocal newspapers. One of the biggest targets was the Pakistan Progressive Papers Limited, which owned Daily Pakistan Times in English, Daily Imroz in Urdu, and Weekly Lelo Nihar in Urdu. So the editor of Pakistan Times was Faiz Ahmed Faiz. The editor of Imroz, the Urdu sister publication, was Chirag Hassan Hasrat, and Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi used to run the weekly. So you can see how strong the press was, even with the presence. And so Pakistan Times and Mashriq and other newspapers were immediately nationalized. And then they were basically what they were doing was they were sending a message, teaching a lesson to those who were very vocal, and sending a message to others who were planning to be, or who were not that vocal. The new leaf is basically, it's really interesting that this was an editorial which was given to the newspapers who were nationalized by the government to publish it with the title, The New Leaf. I'll find it and I'll share it with you. So all newspapers published it, English and Urdu, including Progressive Papers Limited. Interestingly, Chirag Hassan Hasrat refused to publish it. He said that this is kind of giving away their own identity, because one, they were nationalized, taken over, and second, they published it. Faiz Ahmed Faiz published it. And Chirag Hassan Hasrat told him that he shouldn't do that. It won't look nice in the future. And Faiz regretted it always that he did that. But such was the power of the government. And then they said, okay, we will go for a press commission just to inquire into how the press is doing. And the question there was whether the press is loyal or not. The question here is that Pakistan was just formed in 1947. Even the government didn't know what to do, but immediately they got time to investigate into the working of the press, which is funny, because how can you do that? I think the press commission was formed in 1954 already, like 47, 54, and there was a lot going on in the political area. But they said, okay, just forget about everything. Just see if the press is loyal or not. And the press commission's findings came in 1958. Martial law was there. So within the 11-year, Pakistan lost democracy, went into a military rule because of non-recognition of democratic credentials in the country. And then became the 1960 Press and Publication Ordinance, which you know as the 1963 or 64 Ordinance. It was one of the biggest laws with don't do this. Like there are 16 sections, I think, that tell you what not to do. Like we discussed it earlier, that this is not regulatory, this attitude. Uh, so we see the intention of the government to be very much against the press. And it was all about narrative. Like the government thought that they are the sole custodians of narrative. Like people should know everything to do through them, nobody else. And especially the ruling political party. And when you look at what's going on right now, and you look at the previous government and before that, you will see that very obviously that despite the fact that we think about military dictatorships, the role of political governments when it comes to the press is never exemplary. It's not even acceptable. So here is how it worked. For the press, it was a migration of individual newspapers, and the government decided, okay, let's take over a couple of newspapers and use them as our own spokesperson. Radio was there already. It began in 1936, somewhere, I think 34 to 36. The first radio station in Pakistan, in undivided India, was Peshawar, which was established because this propaganda instrument against the Russian government, which was somehow what we call ether control in Afghanistan. This is what we call the great game, basically, between Tsarist Russia and Imperial Britain. So the radio was there. It was His Majesty's voice, or Her Majesty's voice, when Queen Elizabeth took over. HMV, by the way, is also a recording company. And TV, so it was just change of hands. So government owned news radio before. There is a saying by a British politician, a political scientist, who says that radio is too important to be left alone. So our government always thinks that we shouldn't leave the radio alone. Every government does that, but then it's relative. Television just started in 1964. There was an industrial exhibition taking place in Pakistan, and many things were displayed. And this is what we call the dominant paradigm of development, in which the Western government said, okay, after 1945, we have rebuilt Europe. So why don't we rebuild the whole world? And they said, okay, we will give aid. And how would people change? And one of the biggest issues was, how would people accept new methods of working, like professional growth, agriculture, and everything? Why would somebody leave their yoke and their traditional ways of farming and buy a tractor on loans? So there were two things: the Agricultural Development Bank in Pakistan, for example, which is now known as Zarai Tarakkiyati Bank. Like, that's the change. And the other thing was that there were consultants hired, researchers done, which supported the idea of national integration and development tied to mass media, like mass media and societal growth. And they said, okay, if you have television, you can convince people of adopting newer behaviors, and then they'll change, and this will strengthen your economy. So these were very strong experts, like everywhere, and there were book publications, and there were direct contacts. So these people were just convincing world leader in the newly emerging states to go for a new development paradigm, of which mass media was a big part. Pakistan was also one of those countries. So Pakistan decided to start in television. And it was General Ayub Khan, the then president, and he inaugurated. I'll share the speech that General Ayub Khan delivered, and it's very clear, it's very precise. Don has reproduced it a couple of years back, and I have a copy, and you can find it in the archives also, which clearly states that we were not ready to do that, to go for television, but we will, because we think it's important, because he clearly states in his speech that he knows that there are other important things to be taken care of, but we are investing in television for the very purpose that it's important. And he also said, and that was his worry, that people might be afraid of knowing that this might change our cultural structure, control it, like change it in a very adverse way. So we have taken care of it. The financial authority and also policy lies with the government. It still lies with the government, and it's the government mouthpiece. So that's the beginning of very strong electronic media structure in Pakistan. PTV still controls more than 80% of terrestrial reach. Like no matter how many cable networks you have, PTV is the stronger. The same as BBC, Pakistan Broadcasting Corporation. These are basically established through the Act of Parliament, so they have a very strong governmental ownership. And so when we say that, who had what roles, basically, what were the role conceptions of different segments of the society when it comes to media? And herein lies basically the dilemma, basically the biggest problem that we face, that why does any government like the media? Why is it always a conflict? Why don't they accept that media could be of any use? And some people will say it's easy in the age of trolling and social media that because media doesn't do the right thing. And then one will ask whether the parliamentarians do the right thing, whether they are always right, or whether the bureaucracy is functioning perfectly. I don't think so. Nothing is ideal. It's like the beauty of democracy lies basically in surviving and amid all these crises. But why is media always the target? So look at the roles. The government thought from the very beginning, and many political scientists agree to the fact that the Pakistani governments from the very beginning in 1947 thought that they had the monopoly over power. So they should decide what people would think. And nobody had the right to interfere into basically deciding how people should behave, what people should wear, how people should have a discourse. Like they wanted that control. So the only institution that they thought could challenge their power was the media. Media, on the other hand, educated young men and women, mostly men at that time, urban. Some of them migrated. Many of them migrated. Big names. They had a very strong zeal. They thought that they have the right and duty to have an adversary role, like they should challenge the government, that the government should govern better, and they should educate the people, they should guide the people, because they were aware of all the problems Pakistan had. Like when I see the media today and when I look back into history and also my lifespan, I see that the roles have changed. And the media is not like media and journalists are not that active as they used to be. Then we see who were the people that they were trying to upgrade, like the population. So we had basically two sets of population. One of them is the urban educated class wanting a larger role in decision making, like you and I, for example. I'm not a fully urban guy, but still, we think that we should decide what the governments should do. I don't know whether you think like that or not, but 20 years, 30 years back, we used to think like that. We said, okay, if there is a government, it should listen to us. And the voice that we can, how would our voice reach the government is through the media. So that was one segment of the population. On the other hand, more than 80% of Pakistani population living in villages had a lot of problems. They had problems of survival, of existence, of making both ends meet. They were illiterate. They had common folk wisdom, but they didn't know what the world was going through. So they didn't care. And they remained ready to accept whatever is offered. And that's one of the biggest reasons that most of the time, anti-intellectualism in governments, which is directly reflected in their policies towards the media, is because they think that most of the people in this country don't need that guidance from anybody. This small urban intelligentsia should be just kept quiet. And since it's a democracy, you win votes by counting heads, and you don't care that if a small number doesn't care about you. So that's basically the problem. That's the beginning, and till date this remains the same. Like, governments never like the media because governments think that it's their prerogative to rule the country. They don't think that in the governance process media might help. Like, therein lies the problem. It has not yet been solved. So that was all from me, and let's stop